Your home is not a liability. Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is wrong. You've probably read or heard about Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you probably know his position on home ownership, where he suggests that your home is a liability.
Your house is not an asset.
I want to give you a fresh perspective on why your home is not a liability, but more of an underperforming asset rather than a full-on liability. So to start, let's talk about Robert Kiyosaki and the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. According to him, a home is a liability because it takes money out of your pocket. You've got mortgage payments to make, you've got tax payments to make, you've got maintenance payments to make, but no income is being generated from that property. Robert Kiyosaki defines an asset as something that puts money in your pocket, and a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. Based on that simple, very simplistic definition, it's easy to understand why he might not see your home as an asset and might view it as a liability. My definition of an asset is something that has the likelihood, the propensity, the chance of increasing in value over the long term. Whereas Robert Kiyosaki implies that an asset is something that has to put money into your pocket immediately, something that generates cash flow immediately, and that's the distinct difference between where we both stand on this matter. But another way to really look at this is to consider your home as an underperforming asset. Just because it's not generating cash flow immediately doesn't mean it has no value or it lacks value. For the purpose of making sure you understand that Robert Kiyosaki was incorrect, let's look at some examples of things that are categorically defined as assets. So for example, gold. It doesn't give you any cash flow until you sell it, but it's still considered an asset, just like your home. Fine art, for example, doesn't give you cash flow, doesn't give you income. You don't make any money from it until it's sold, just like your property, but its value appreciates over time. It's an asset. Going back to my definition of an asset is something that has the likelihood, the propensity to increase in value over time, but it doesn't have to pay you today and can pay you in the nearer future. Let's consider something equally important, non-dividend paying stocks. They don't pay out regularly, but they still increase in value. They still have some value. Are we going to run around and say gold, fine art, non-dividend paying stocks are not assets? Of course they're assets. These are all still assets. They don't pay cash flow and you don't make any money from them specifically until you sell. But that's exactly the same as your property. So is your home an asset or a liability? Well, it's certainly not a liability. Let's look at why your home is an asset. So historically, UK property prices tend to increase over time. In 2001, the average property price in the UK was around £80,000. Fast forward just 20 years later, the average property price is around £288,000. That's over 250% growth in nearly 2 decades. Your home is not an asset because it doesn't give you cash flow and you've got to spend money on it, but the value increases. This is really basic stuff. And this guy sold 1 million books off the back of this. Don't get me wrong, still an incredible book and a lot of information that will help you on your financial journey. So this isn't to bash the book because I think it's an incredible book, but a lot of people fear that they're doing something wrong because their home is not classified as an asset. I want to change that perspective and show you that your home is an asset, it's just an underperforming asset. So even if we look at shorter time frames, property values over time and into the future will carry on showing consistent growth. For example, just in the last 10 years by itself, UK property prices have increased over 50%. So even if your home is not cash flowing, which means a monthly recurring income, its value is likely increasing. So when I say your home is not a liability, but it's an underperforming asset, then it's important to figure out how you can turn this underperforming asset into a performing asset. That should be the contention. It's not, is my home a liability or is my home an asset? How do I turn an underperforming asset into a performing asset? That is specifically your job. That is specifically what you've got to spend time trying to figure out. Well, number one, you benefit from the equity growth. You buy a property for £100,000 over a 20-year period. That property value can increase to £200,000, £300,000, £400,000. It's an asset. Number two, as the value of your property increases over time and you have pent-up value, aka equity, you can remortgage that property, take out equity, and go and buy cash flowing assets. If you want to turn your underperforming asset into a performing asset, you can rent out your spare room. You can get a lodger, which is tax-free up to £7,000, or you can Airbnb your spare room. Or when you go on holiday, you can Airbnb the entire house. And that's you finding a way to turn the underperforming asset, which means something that's taking money from you, into something that's at least breaking even or generating some money for you. Lastly, you could sell the property. If you buy a property, over time the value goes up, and when you are ready, you can sell that asset and make a load of money. How have we got to a place where we're denying a property, a home, being an asset? Of course it's an asset. But this is the part a lot of people don't take into consideration. Now, as much as I want you to improve your financial education, your financial literacy, I fear that a lot of people will fall into these brackets of, if this is not an asset and this isn't giving me income, then I'm not going to do it. And I think that's an incorrect way of trying to grow your wealth. There has to be a level of realism, because the truth is, whether we classify your home as an asset or a liability, it's kind of a redundant topic. The simple reason is we all need somewhere to live. There is a cost to accommodation. There is a cost of having shelter. So if everything in your life is based on what gives you income, and a liability is based on what takes money from you, then where on earth are you going to live? There is a cost to accommodation. So we have to factor that into the equation. So to make a blanket statement to say where you live is a liability is incorrect. There is always going to be a cost to shelter and accommodation, whether you are owning the property or you are renting the property. Even if you don't own the home, you're still going to have to pay for the cost of accommodation, which means you're still going to have to pay rent or pay for shelter somewhere. You're going to pay rent, you pay utilities, you pay maintenance, you pay bills. That money's still coming out of your pocket. So when we get too carried away on this idea of whether a house or a home is an asset or a liability, the vast majority of people are missing the bigger picture. At the end of the day, you have to live somewhere, and that's a cost that we all have to share. So instead of looking at home as, is it an asset or a liability, it's actually much more saner, much more useful to think about it as there is a cost to accommodation, but with the potential to increase in value. So is your home an asset or a liability? Well, according to Robert Kiyosaki, your home is a liability, and I completely disagree. But it really just depends on how you look at it. Do you believe Robert Kiyosaki or do you believe myself? If you believe an asset solely focuses on cash flow, then I can understand why you would think your home is a liability and not an asset. But if you are wise enough to consider that an asset, just like gold, just like stock, just like fine art, can pay you in the long term, and you understand the value of long-term capital appreciation, equity growth, the potential to generate a rental income at some point, then I guess you will believe or subscribe to the notion that your home is an asset. Albeit, I have to say, an underperforming asset. Let's look at some prime examples of stocks, non-dividend paying stocks. So that means stocks that don't give you cash flow or income. And I want you to let me know this in the comment section. These three companies that I'm about to mention, would we classify them as categoric assets, or would anyone within their right mind confidently say that these are liabilities? So let's look at Amazon, for example. Amazon, one of the largest companies in the world, it reinvests its profits back into the business, which then boosts the stock price over time, but they don't pay dividends. So is Amazon an asset or a liability? It's an asset. What about Google? Just like Amazon, they don't pay dividends, which means you don't generate money from them on a monthly basis. There is no income, there is no cash flow. Would we say Google stocks are a liability or an asset? What about Tesla? Tesla doesn't pay any dividends. There is no cash flow generated from Tesla stocks. Would we still classify your investment in Tesla as an asset or a liability? Those are the qualifying factors, and those are the qualifying questions we've got to ask. Hey guys, if you get some value from this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section and whether you agree or disagree with me.